The sprawling corridors of the Galactic Engineering Consortium echoed with laughter deep, resonating sounds from beings of all shapes and sizes. Tentacles slapped in amusement, mandibles clacked, and gelatinous creatures rippled with mirth. It was a rare day when every representative from the allied worlds found something to agree on. And this day, that agreement took the form of a single, hilarious concept: humans as engineers. From atop a polished platform, High Engineer Veltok, a towering Corithian with a metallic exoskeleton, addressed the gathered representatives. As we all know, humans have requested leadership positions in the consortium's upcoming planetary defense project. His voice, metallic and tinged with sarcasm, reverberated through the chamber. I believe it is only fair to review their qualifications. A holographic display flickered to life, showing grainy images of Earth-based construction's patchwork vehicles held together by ropes, crude power tools made from repurposed metal, and bridges that leaned precariously as if held up by sheer stubbornness alone. The crowd roared. In the back of the chamber, human engineer David Kessler clenched his jaw. He was one of 3 human representatives allowed into the consortium's headquarters on Relax 3. Standing a few feet away, his fellow engineers, a wiry woman named Lena and a hulking man named Barrett, shifted uncomfortably as the laughter rolled on. Kessler's hands curled into fists. "That's the 5th time this week," Lena muttered, her green eyes blazing. "They've made us the joke of the galaxy." Barrett, who rarely spoke more than necessary, cracked his knuckles. "Let me punch one." "Not yet," Kessler whispered, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We're supposed to be proving we belong here. Let's not give them more ammo." As the holographic display ended, Veltok leaned forward, his golden eyes gleaming. "And so, with utmost seriousness, I propose we assign the scrap specialists to a vital defense challenge. If their unique skills can contribute, perhaps they deserve more respect. Or," he paused dramatically, "we all get one final laugh." The chamber erupted again. Veltok's mocking gaze settled on Kessler. "What say you, human? Will you accept the challenge?" Kessler stepped forward, his boots echoing against the metal floor. "Name it." "Very well," Veltok said, savoring every word. "You and your team will be given access to the scrap storage facility. Your task is to create a functioning defense weapon capable of withstanding a simulated invasion force. You have 1 month. No new materials, no external support, and no sabotage, of course." The last part dripped with condescension. "Agreed," Kessler said. He locked eyes with the Corithian, feeling the weight of every laugh pressing against his pride. "But don't complain when it works." Veltok's laughter joined the cacophony. "I eagerly await the results." As Kessler turned to leave, Lena fell into step beside him. "Do you really think we can pull this off?" "We have to," Kessler replied, "or every engineer who comes after us will be a punchline." Barrett cracked his knuckles again. "So what's the plan?" "We build the impossible," Kessler said, determination hardening his voice. "Out of the scraps they gave us." They left the chamber, ignoring the jeers that followed them like shadows. The scrap storage facility wasn't just a junkyard, it was an insult with walls. Piles of rusting metal stretched for miles, with discarded machinery, half-functioning energy cores, and fragments of failed experiments. The air was thick with the smell of corrosion and ozone. "This place is a death trap," Lena said, kicking aside a broken piece of shielding. "Perfect," Kessler said, already scanning the piles with a critical eye. "It's exactly what we need." Barrett grunted. "Sure. Assuming we don't get tetanus first." Kessler smirked, his eyes glinting with the kind of excitement that only engineers on a mission could understand. "Lena, start cataloging anything that might hold a charge. Old capacitors, cores, whatever you can find. Barrett, we need structural integrity. Find the least rusted metal and see if we can weld anything." "And you?" Lena asked. Kessler grinned. "I'm going to find us a power source." For days, the trio worked tirelessly. Lena scavenged dozens of power cells, most of which sputtered with barely enough energy to light a small bulb. She wired them together, drawing on every ounce of ingenuity to create a functioning circuit. Sparks flew. More than one explosion threatened to send them packing, but she never stopped. Barrett, meanwhile, crafted a skeletal frame from steel beams and reinforced alloys. He worked with the kind of intensity that made even the most stubborn metals yield, and slowly, a crude structure began to emerge. Kessler scoured the depths of the facility until he found what he was looking for: a malfunctioning antimatter core, discarded after a failed experiment. It was unstable, dangerous, and perfect. He dragged it back to their workspace, sweating and grinning like a maniac. "You're insane," Lena said, staring at the core. "That thing could go critical at any moment." Kessler nodded. "Exactly. But if we stabilize it, we have more power than this facility has seen in years." "And if it explodes?" Barrett asked, hammering a stubborn piece of plating into place. "Then they'll have one less human to laugh at," Kessler replied, only half joking. Stabilizing the core was an ordeal. Kessler and Lena spent hours on either side of it, manually calibrating ancient circuits and bypassing security locks. Sparks showered them, and more than once, the core emitted a low, menacing hum that made their hair stand on end. But eventually the hum softened, settling into a steady rhythm. "We did it," Lena whispered, eyes wide. "Not yet," Kessler said, "but it's a start." With power flowing, the real work began. Their goal was clear: build a weapon that could withstand a simulated invasion, using only what they had. It was madness, but Kessler thrived in chaos. He designed a modular weapon system, a hybrid of plasma cannons, kinetic barriers, and anti-gravitational traps. It shouldn't have worked. Every component was held together by ingenuity, duct tape, and sheer willpower. Weeks passed. The trio barely slept, fueled by stubborn pride and too much alien coffee. They faced setback after setback: explosions, power surges, mechanical failures. At one point, the structure collapsed, crushing a week's worth of work. Lena screamed, Barrett punched a wall, and Kessler stared into the wreckage with hollow eyes. But then he began to laugh. "Do you lose it?" Lena asked, shaking him. "No," Kessler replied, still laughing. "It's just, they're going to laugh at us anyway, so let's make it count." Barrett grinned, a rare expression on his face. "Then we build it again. Better." Their resolve hardened. They rebuilt, redesigned, and reimagined every piece. The weapon grew from scraps into something almost beautiful, a chaotic amalgamation of human ingenuity and desperation. Finally, with mere hours to spare, it was complete: a towering defense platform, bristling with weapons and shimmering with unstable energy. "It'll never pass inspection," Lena said, eyeing the structure. "It doesn't have to," Kessler replied. "It just has to work." The day of the demonstration arrived. Representatives from across the galaxy gathered to watch the humans' attempt. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation and condescension. High Engineer Veltok presided over the event, his voice dripping with mock sincerity. "We commend our human colleagues for their spirited effort. Let us witness their creation in action." The simulation began. Automated drones, equipped with advanced weaponry, surged toward the humans' defense platform. It sputtered, groaned, and for a horrifying moment Kessler thought it would fail. But then, with a roar, the antimatter core surged to life. Plasma cannons fired, kinetic barriers flared, and anti-gravitational traps ensnared the drones in a deadly dance. Metal rained from the sky. Gasps filled the air. Laughter turned to stunned silence. Veltok's golden eyes widened. Impossible. The weapon held. For every drone that advanced, 10 more were shredded, melted, or immobilized. Sparks flew, parts failed, and every second felt like an eternity. But when the last drone fell, the platform still stood battered, sparking, but victorious. Kessler stepped forward, sweat soaked and triumphant. "Scrap, huh?" The silence was deafening. Then, a single, grudging clap echoed through the chamber. More followed, hesitant at first, then building to a crescendo. Even Veltok couldn't hide his shock. "You have proven your worth," he said, the words bitter on his tongue. Kessler allowed himself a smile. "Good. Because we're just getting started. The humans had done the impossible. And for the first time, the galaxy realized that underestimating human engineers was a mistake they would never make again. In the days following the human engineers' successful demonstration, the Galactic Engineering Consortium was in an uproar. Messages flashed across holopanels, meetings were hastily convened, and debates raged behind closed doors. Engineer Veltok's pride had taken a heavy hit. He had lost face in front of the entire consortium. The idea that humans, scrap specialists and chaos bringers, as he called them, had created a functional and powerful defense weapon from discarded junk shook his convictions to the core. The success of human engineer David Kessler and his team had sent shockwaves through the engineering community. While some alien species were impressed, others were incensed. The matter was far from over, and Kessler knew it. The initial victory was only the beginning. The next morning, Kessler stood with Lena and Barrett in the same dimly lit scrap facility that had become their home over the past month. Their defense platform, now officially recognized as Project Bastion, stood battered but intact. Repairs were underway, and curious engineers from various species filtered in, each hoping to glean some insight into what the humans had done. Lena, perched atop a scaffolding and tightening bolts, glanced at Kessler. "It doesn't feel real. They're actually interested in how we did this." Kessler nodded. "Most of them are here to copy it or find weaknesses. We embarrassed a lot of people." Barrett adjusted a large panel, his expression unreadable. "Let them try." Before Kessler could respond, a deep, booming voice interrupted them. "Human engineers, your presence is requested." Kessler turned to see a delegation of Corithians, led by High Engineer Veltok. Behind them stood several senior representatives from other species, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Veltok's metallic exoskeleton glimmered in the dim light, and his golden eyes bore into Kessler. "We've come to inspect this. Bastion of yours," Veltok announced. "If it is to be considered a valid contribution to our planetary defense, we must determine its true capabilities." Kessler exchanged a glance with Lena and Barrett. This was more than an inspection, it was a test, one designed to push them to their limits and possibly discredit them. "Fine," Kessler said, his voice steady. "What do you have in mind?" The inspection quickly transformed into an endurance trial. High Engineer Veltok outlined a grueling series of tests. Bastion would have to withstand sustained assaults from multiple attack drones, endure EMP blasts designed to disable its circuitry, and repel waves of simulated biological threats. Each phase of the trial was designed to expose any flaws or weaknesses in the human-engineered platform. The first wave was straightforward. Hundreds of drones swarmed toward Bastion, their weapons blazing. Kessler, Lena, and Barrett scrambled to direct the platform's defenses. Plasma cannons roared to life, shredding the drones with precision fire. Kinetic barriers flared and absorbed incoming blasts. The air crackled with energy. From a secure observation deck, Veltok and the other representatives watched intently. The Corithian leaned in, whispering to his aides. "Notice the instability of their power core. It cannot sustain such output for long." Inside the control room of Bastion, Lena was painfully aware of that very issue. "Cores fluctuating," she called out, sweat dripping down her brow. "It's going to overload if we keep this up." Kessler's mind raced. "We'll reroute excess energy to auxiliary systems. Lena, can you siphon some off into the kinetic traps?" "I'll try," she said, her fingers flying over the controls. Barrett, meanwhile, was manning the structural reinforcements. "Incoming fires weakening the south barrier. We need to shift support, or it'll collapse." "Diverting resources," Kessler replied. "Hold it together." The battle raged on. Each moment was a test of improvisation and endurance. Bastion groaned under the strain, sparks flew, and for a terrifying instant, one of the plasma cannons short-circuited. But somehow, they pushed through. When the last drone fell, the chamber was eerily silent. Lena exhaled slowly. That was close. Veltok's voice crackled through the intercom. "Impressive. But we are far from finished." The next test began a wave of EMP pulses, designed to disable any electrical systems. Kessler braced himself. The crude wiring and patchwork circuits of Bastion were especially vulnerable to electromagnetic disruption. Sparks erupted as the pulses hit, and the entire platform shuddered. "Systems are failing," Lena shouted. "We're losing control." Barrett grabbed a set of tools, his face set in grim determination. "We're not going down yet." Kessler nodded. "Lena, isolate the critical circuits." Barrett, bypass the fried components. They worked frantically, fingers moving faster than seemed possible. Lena rerouted power through redundant circuits that had been added on a whim jury-rigged systems that, by all rights, should not have functioned. Barrett manually rewired key components, using whatever scrap he could find. It was messy, desperate, and chaotic. It was also exactly what they were best at. To the surprise of everyone watching, Bastion's systems flickered back to life. Veltok's jaw tightened. "How?" "They adapted," murmured one of the senior representatives, a gelatinous being named Ulimar. "They thrive on improvisation." The final test was the most insidious, a simulated biological threat, a swarm of nanomachines designed to infiltrate and disable machinery from within. The swarm descended on Bastion, seeking any vulnerability. For a moment, all seemed lost. The human's creation, with its patchwork components, was a prime target. Kessler's mind raced. "The swarm is targeting weak points. We need to bait it." "Bait it," Lena echoed, disbelief in her voice. "With what?" "Something it can't resist," Kessler replied, already moving. He grabbed a decoy power source, a bundle of half-depleted capacitors, and rigged it to emit an energy signature. "Barrett, help me get this outside." Together, they hauled the decoy out and activated it. The nanomachine swarmed toward the new target, and Kessler triggered a containment field. The trap snapped shut, and the swarm was neutralized. For a long moment, there was silence. Then, a slow, reluctant applause began. It was hesitant, but genuine. "You have exceeded expectations," Veltok admitted, his voice cold. "Your methods are unconventional but effective." Scrap, Kessler said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "That's what you called it. Funny how scrap can save lives." In the days that followed, word of Bastion's success spread across the consortium. Kessler, Lena, and Barrett found themselves inundated with offers, questions, and invitations from species who once mocked them. Everyone wanted to know how the humans had done it. Some sought to learn, others to undermine, but the trio took it all in stride. Not everyone was pleased, however. Hidden agendas brewed among those who felt their positions threatened. Veltok, humiliated and seething, vowed to expose the humans' weaknesses. He convened a secret council of like-minded individuals, plotting ways to undermine Kessler and his team. Their methods would be less public and far more dangerous. Meanwhile, Kessler and his crew focused on refining Bastion. They patched weak points, improved power distribution, and modified weapon systems. Lena discovered a way to boost the antimatter core's stability, while Barrett reinforced structural integrity with surprising elegance. The weapon grew stronger, not just a monument to survival, but a true beacon of human ingenuity. But just as they were gaining momentum, a message arrived, a challenge from the Corithian Council. A live-fire exercise, far beyond anything the consortium had seen. Real danger, real stakes. "Another test?" Barrett asked, suspicion in his voice. "No," Kessler said, eyes narrowing. "A trap." The exercise took place on a remote moon, far from prying eyes. Bastion was deployed alongside other defense platforms, each representing different species' engineering prowess. Veltok, of course, oversaw the exercise, and the stakes were clear. Failure would mean not just embarrassment, but annihilation. Kessler knew it was a calculated move to discredit them. As the simulated invasion began, something felt off. The simulated attackers displayed tactics far more lethal than expected. Plasma bursts, energy lances, and targeted bombardments threatened to overwhelm every defense. "This isn't a test," Lena shouted, sparks flying from a nearby panel. "They're trying to destroy us." "We hold," Kessler said, his voice steel. "We hold, or we die." Barrett's hands blurred, as he manually operated the weapon systems. Lena rerouted power to critical systems, overriding every safety measure. Kessler issued commands, calculating risk and reward with terrifying speed. As the battle raged, a secondary threat emerged: sabotage. Hidden charges detonated within Bastion, causing internal fires and structural failures. Veltok's trap had sprung. "They want us dead," Barrett growled, fury in his eyes. "Let them try," Kessler spat back. They fought like cornered beasts. When energy reserves ran low, they redirected power from non-essential systems. When barriers failed, they reinforced them with raw scrap, welding under fire. When all seemed lost, they dug deep, improvising, adapting, and refusing to yield. Minutes felt like hours. Blood, sweat, and metal mixed into a chaotic symphony of survival. Finally, with one last surge of power, Bastion unleashed a pulse that obliterated the remaining attackers. Silence fell. The platform trembled, barely holding together. Kessler, covered in soot and blood, stood atop the battered structure and glared at Veltok, who watched from a distance. "Is that all you've got?" Kessler shouted. Veltok's expression was a mix of rage and fear. He had underestimated humans once more. The aftermath was chaotic. Conspiracies unraveled, alliances shifted, and the consortium was forced to confront its biases. Kessler and his team, battered but unbroken, became symbols of resilience. The scrap they wielded was more than metal; it was a testament to their refusal to be dismissed, their ability to rise under impossible odds. "They laughed at human engineers," Lena said one evening, staring at the stars. "Not anymore." Kessler smiled, exhaustion in every line of his face. "They'll think twice next time." "They'll do more than that," Barrett added, a rare hint of pride. "They'll learn." The trio stood together, knowing their journey was far from over. The galaxy had seen what they could do; it would never underestimate them again. The days following the live fire exercise on the remote moon were a whirlwind of political maneuvering, celebrations, and hidden dangers. News of the human engineers' triumph with their scrap-built weapons spread like wildfire. Many species praised their ingenuity, while others grumbled in discontent. High Engineer Veltok, humiliated by his failed attempt to sabotage them, withdrew from public appearances, but Kessler knew better than to consider him defeated. The Corithians' pride and ambition would not be so easily extinguished. Amidst the chaos, Kessler, Lena, and Barrett found themselves summoned to a high-level consortium summit. This was no ordinary meeting; it was a tribunal disguised as recognition. They walked into the grand hall with wary eyes, Bastion's success still fresh in their minds. Kessler knew that with triumph came enemies, and those enemies were gathering strength. The hall was packed with delegates from hundreds of species. Each one sat in elevated seats, forming a massive amphitheater with Kessler and his team standing alone at its center. At the head of the chamber sat the High Council, a group of the galaxy's most influential figures. Veltok was among them, his golden eyes gleaming with barely concealed malice. A tall, crystalline being named Orlix, whose body refracted light in mesmerizing patterns, presided over the meeting. Human engineers David Kessler, Lena Moretti, and Barrett Calder. Orlix announced, voice echoing throughout the chamber, "You stand here today as both champions of ingenuity and subjects of intense scrutiny." Kessler took a deep breath. "We are prepared to answer any questions." "Indeed," Orlix replied, crystalline arms shifting. "Your weapon, Bastion, has proven effective. Too effective, some would say. Questions have arisen about its stability, its long-term viability, and its potential misuse." Lena's eyes narrowed. "We built it to protect." And yet Veltok interjected smoothly, "Its unstable antimatter core and chaotic construction make it a potential hazard to everyone around it. One mistake, one critical failure, and it could decimate entire sectors." "Sounds like you're more concerned about the weapon's power than its flaws," Barrett rumbled, his voice low and dangerous. The tension in the hall thickened. Kessler stepped forward, every word carefully measured. "Bastion is a tool, a symbol of what can be achieved through resourcefulness and determination. If you believe it is a threat, it's because you fear what it represents, the power to stand against overwhelming odds." Eltock's gaze hardened. You twist words well, human, but rhetoric won't protect us from the realities of your scrap-built monstrosity. Orlix raised a crystalline hand, silencing further arguments. Enough. The council has debated and deliberated. Bastion's success cannot be ignored, but neither can the concerns it raises. We propose a final tested demonstration of your weapon's potential to defend a critical target under real conditions. If it succeeds, you will be granted full recognition as senior engineers. If it fails, it will be dismantled. Kessler's heart pounded. What is the target? Orlix's light fractured, casting eerie reflections across the chamber. A colony on the edge of our frontier, frequently harassed by raiders. It is an active threat, not a simulation. Will you accept? Yes, Kessler said without hesitation. The stakes were high, but refusing was not an option. Preparations began immediately. The colony, named Erdal's Hope, was situated on the edge of known space, vulnerable to attacks from raiders and rogue factions. Bastion was transported there piece by piece, each segment carefully reassembled by Kessler, Lena, Barrett, and a small crew of curious alien engineers who had volunteered, some out of genuine respect, others out of morbid fascination. As they worked, Kessler noticed the subtle tension among the crew. The sabotage attempt during the live fire exercise had been a stark reminder that not everyone wanted them to succeed. Trust was a scarce resource, and every glance, every hesitant gesture was scrutinized. Lena was perched atop a scaffold, reconnecting a section of the kinetic barriers. Kessler, we've got problems. Define problems, Kessler replied, his hands deep in a panel of malfunctioning circuits. The anti-grav traps are acting up. Some of the emitters are misaligned. If they go off during an attack, they'll pull us apart instead of the raiders. Kessler cursed under his breath. We'll fix it. Barrett approached, a deep frown etched into his face. Got word from one of the scouts. The raiders know we're here. They're mobilizing. How long do we have? Kessler asked. Not long enough, Barrett replied. Kessler felt the weight of the mission pressing down on him. Then we work faster. Hours passed in a blur of welding sparks, recalibrations, and desperate improvisation. The colony's residents, a mix of species who had fled conflict and sought refuge on the frontier, watched anxiously. For them, this was more than an engineering challenge, it was life and death. Finally, Bastion stood ready. It was far from perfect. Scratches, dents, and hastily patched sections bore testament to their struggle. But it was theirs, and it was all that stood between Erdal's hope and annihilation. When the raiders arrived, they came in force. Ships bristling with weapons descended from orbit, their engines blazing trails of fire. Ground vehicles, crude but deadly, roared toward the colony's perimeter. This was no mere raid, it was a calculated assault, designed to crush resistance. Kessler, Lena, and Barrett stood at Bastion's control center, their faces grim. This was it. Plasma cannons online, Kessler asked. Barely, Lena replied, her fingers flying over the controls. But they'll fire. Kinetic barriers ready, Kessler continued. Barrett nodded. They'll hold. For a while. Good, Kessler said, his voice steady. Then let's give them hell. The battle began with a deafening roar. Bastion's plasma cannons lit up the sky, striking at the raider ships with deadly precision. Explosions rocked the ground as energy beams tore through metal and flesh alike. Kinetic barriers shimmered and crackled, absorbing blasts that would have reduced the colony to rubble. But the raiders were relentless. Wave after wave descended, probing for weaknesses. They adapted, shifting tactics, and soon Bastion was pushed to its limits. Panels sparked, circuits overloaded, and the antimatter core pulsed with a dangerous rhythm. We're overheating, Lena shouted, sweat pouring down her face. If we keep pushing the core, it'll go critical. Kessler's mind raced. We need to vent the excess energy. How Barrett demanded, his fists clenched around the manual override levers. Kessler's eyes lit up with a desperate idea. The anti-grav traps. We can use them to create a controlled discharge. It'll destabilize the raiders' ground forces and give us a chance to reset. Lena hesitated for a split second, then nodded. It's risky, but it might work. Do it, Kessler said. Barrett activated the anti-grav traps, and the ground beneath the raiders erupted in a wave of energy. Vehicles were lifted and thrown, scattering like leaves in a storm. The surge of power provided a momentary reprieve, but it came at a cost. Bastion shuddered, internal systems failing. We've got breaches, Lena yelled. They're trying to infiltrate. Not on my watch, Barrett growled. He grabbed a plasma cutter and marched toward the access points. Kessler focused on stabilizing the core. His hands moved with practiced precision, bypassing fried circuits and rerouting power. Sparks burned his skin, but he didn't flinch. Come on, he whispered. Hold together. Lena fought beside him, her determination a match for his own. Together they brought Bastion back from the brink, just as the raiders regrouped for a final assault. The sky darkened as a massive ship descended, a flagship, bristling with weapons. It unleashed a barrage that shattered the ground and sent shockwaves through Bastion. Kessler's heart sank. They had nothing left to counter it. But then, from the colony's outskirts, a ragtag group of residents appeared. Armed with whatever they could find, makeshift weapons, tools, even kitchen utensils, they charged the raiders, a desperate wave of defiance. Inspired, Kessler found one last reserve of strength. Divert everything to the core, he said, voice hoarse. We're taking that ship down. Lena's eyes widened. Are you crazy? Probably, Kessler replied. But it's our only shot. Barrett returned, bloodied but unbowed. Do it. They poured every last ounce of power into Bastion's cannons. The antimatter core flared, dangerously unstable, as the weapon unleashed a final, blinding beam of energy. It struck the flagship, piercing its shields and tearing it apart in a cataclysmic explosion. When the dust settled, the raiders were gone. Bastion, now a broken shell of itself, stood victorious. The colony was saved. Kessler collapsed, exhaustion overwhelming him. Lena and Barrett sank beside him, equally drained. Around them, the colonists cheered, their cries echoing through the battered landscape. Days later, back at the consortium's headquarters, the trio stood before the council once more. Veltok was conspicuously absent, his machinations exposed and disgraced. Orlix's crystalline form shimmered with approval. You have proven yourselves not just as engineers, but as defenders of life. Bastion was more than a weapon, it was a symbol of hope. The council recognizes your contributions and welcomes you as senior engineers. Kessler nodded, too tired for words. He glanced at Lena and Barrett, knowing they felt the same. This was a victory, but it came at a cost. As they left the chamber, Lena spoke quietly. They'll test us again. They always will. Let them, Barrett said, his voice hard. We'll keep building. Kessler looked up at the stars. And when they laugh next time? We'll turn their laughter into ashes, Lena replied, a fierce smile playing at her lips. Together they walked on, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The galaxy had learned not to underestimate human engineers. And if it forgot, they would be there to remind it, one scrap-built miracle at a time.